And we didn't lose everybody else, did we? No. Okay, good. Okay, so we're on 50A. Actually, two dots, about 10 lines down. So the Mishnah was talking about what makes a Nazir Tameh to the extent that his Nazirus is interrupted. And one thing that it said was, it mentioned a measure of a kazayas of netzel. Netzel is unclear what that is. It's some kind of liquefied, congealed runoff from a dead body. Ezu netzel. Mara says, what is that? The sarhamesh shakarash. That's flesh that congealed. Umohel shehirtiach. And fluids from a body that when you heat them, they bubble. So that's apparently the test, is something like something could just be, phlegm or something like that, which is not, integrally part of the dead person's flesh. Apparently the test is if you heat it, so that kind of fluid will not bubble, but something that is congealed flesh will bubble. I guess it's got fat content or something, if that's the case. When do you need to do this test? So maybe you'll say that you don't know if this I'm going to call the liquid, the gel, maybe you don't know it's from the body or not. Hikarish might have it. So then, even if it's congealed, then who cares? It could still be, you haven't learned anything. Like it could still be flesh or not flesh. You know that it came from the body. Then if you know that it came from the body, what's the difference if it congealed or not, right? If it's still, if it actually came from the flesh and there's a kazais of it, it makes you coming. The answer is stop. So you don't know what kind of material it is. Okay, maybe you know it came from the corpse, but you don't know if it's, as I said before, it could be phlegm or it could be congealed flesh. Ikar Shmuel. So if it congealed, then you know it's from the body. Low karish, if it did not congeal, then it could be phlegm, which does not make you coming. Okay. Abai asked Rabbi, Yesh netzel behemo, ain't netzel behemo. What about when it comes to an animal, that animal that makes you tame? So now we're not talking about the tumah that makes a person tame by touching a dead body, dead person, not like that makes, that is forbidden to a Kohen or to a Nazir, but there is a type of tumah that is transmitted by an animal that died in the vela, right? The animal that was not slaughtered properly. Is netzel a thing, right? If there's congealed flesh from this animal, is that considered something that makes you tame to that extent? Do we say that gemire, that there's a tradition, we have a lachol Moshe Sinai, that there is such a thing as netzel when it comes to a human body? Maybe the tradition does not include netzel from an animal. Or maybe netzel is netzel. Dead flesh is dead flesh. Maybe there's no reason to distinguish between human and animal. So, and the Gemara continues to investigate the two sides of this. Tuma chamura ad lager. So when it says ger here, it means when the Torah says that that nevela flesh is forbidden to you, it says lager asher bisharecha titnana. Machor l'nachri. So what can you do with such flesh? You can't eat it. You can give it to a ger, meaning a stranger, not meaning a convert, but meaning a non-Jewish person who does not have the restrictions of eating only properly shechted meat. So you can give it to a non-Jew, which we're going to call here a ger, or you can feed it to the dog. So if you say that tuma chamura ad lager, that this type of tuma from a dead animal is sufficiently stringent that it continues to be tame until it's no longer fit to give to the ger, right? In other words, it's no longer fit for human consumption, but it could still be fit to feed to your dog, right? The tuma kala ad lakela, and lesser tuma um, is food can still have a lesser tuma, less than the vela. In other words, it cannot contaminate people, but it can contaminate objects. So that remains until the food has, as long as it's still suitable for consumption by a dog. Um, so then, so if you hold that this tuma chamura, that the tuma that is transmitted by a nevela can still be effective um, if it's fit for human consumption, then shapir. Then we understand. Then we know the answer about netzel. How? Because netzel is not fit for human consumption, right? Nobody's going to eat that, right? Um, so so then there's no issue of netzel being netzel being of an animal being able to transmit tuma, because as soon as it becomes netzel, it is no longer consumable by humans, and therefore it does not. There's no question about whether it can transmit tuma. It cannot. But what if you say that even beyond the point where it's fit for human consumption, but it's still fit for animal consumption, to feed to a dog, then maybe netzel qualifies, right? Sure, you and I aren't going to eat netzel, right? But a dog might eat netzel. So then we would still have the question: if it's still considered tame and can transmit tuma to people, this netzel of an animal, what's the rule, right? It could be that netzel is indeed sure, it's eligible, but it could be that it is indeed included in the tradition of being tame and making you tame, or it could be not, right? Um, so that's our question. So the question is a little bit more restricted, but the question is still: does netzel from an animal make you tame, right? And the question only makes sense if you hold that netzel is a tuma chamura, and if you hold that netzel could still potentially make you tame from the point of view of it being still edible by a dog. Okay, but then the question is: does the tradition include netzel or not? Tashma. Does that make sense? Am I being clear? Tashma. Here's a proof from a brisa. Imchuhu bu'ur tame. If you took this is talking about the fat of a bird, of a kosher bird. If you took the fat and melted it on the fire, tame. It's still tame. So we're talking about in the vela again. So melting it does not help you. Behema tahar. No, sorry, b'chama. B'chama tahar. If it melted in the sun, then it's tahar, because what's the difference? If you cook something over a fire, you cook fat over a fire, that's how people eat things, right? But if it's putrefied in the sun, if it's heated in the sun, that means it's rotten. Nobody's going to eat that. So since it's not edible, it no longer makes you tame. Now, if you think that novela can make you tame until the point where it is not edible by a dog, afilu b'chamaname. So this fat that was melted in the sun, true, you and I aren't going to eat it, but a dog would eat it, right? So the brisa seems to say that netzel does not apply to an animal. So Gemara says not necessarily. Amos ma'afila. When does it melt? Basar the israch b'chama. This melting in the sun, this is not only disqualifies it from eating by a person. If it's melted in the sun, it's so far gone that even a dog won't eat it. Kevin the but once it's gone bad, it's like dust. It's not even a dog is going to eat it.
A story where Rav Soloveitchik was giving a shiur, he describes some particular thing as not being edible for a dog, and his students decided to do an empirical test, and they gave it to a dog, and the dog ate it. And they reported back to Rav Soloveitchik, and he said, who's your Rebbe, me or the dog?"
You're the doc. Uh, yeah, well, it's actually an interesting philosophical point, right?
Yeah.
Are we talking about reality, or are we talking about how how things came to be defined in the halachic system? And
And
we
he,
often find
he
conflict between that.
I have heard from some of his students that he actually was very much, it's the halakhic system that even overrides reality at times,
Uh-huh.
which is interesting.
Yeah. Um, okay.
I'm not sure everybody agrees with him on that, but that was his position.
So now we have a mission. Koha nitzak tahar. The mission says if you pour from, let's say you have something tame and you're pouring it into, sorry, the other way around. You have something tahor and you're pouring it into a tame vessel. Okay, so obviously whatever comes into the tame vessel becomes tame, and what remains once you stop pouring, what remains in the tahor vessel remains tahor. In other words, the tuma is not transmitted through the stream going from the tahor to the tame. Okay, which makes sense, right? Because the direction of the flow is one way, right? Nothing flows back into the tahor vessel. So there's nothing in the tahor vessel has ever been in the tame vessel, right? There's two exceptions. Something that has a higher viscosity, like this particular kind of honey, and tzafichis, which is translated as like a batter, okay, the viscous batter. So you sometimes get the impression that, when you stop pouring, there's a contraction of this material of the it's not exactly a liquid. What do you call something that's not quite a liquid, not quite a solid, like glass? There's a word for that, right, Charlie?
Yeah,
Okay, but a
I don't
very
remember the
viscous
word for it.
liquid.
I think it's technically a super cool liquid.
Okay, but a viscous liquid. So you have that experience, right? If you're pouring, let's say, honey, when you stop, there's kind of, it springs back to the source, right?
Nice ketchup.
Yeah. So in that case, ketchup is a good example, also. So, so in that case, we do say that that there might be tuma that returns to, or that goes back into the tahor vessel. That's the source. And Beit Shammai Omrim Af HaMikvah Shel Grisin V'Shel Pul. Another example, Beit Shammai says even this kind of porridge is thick enough. Mipnei Shisaladas Lachorah. All these examples are because it kind of springs back. So by Rami Bar Chama asks, Yesh Nitzok La'ochlin, O Ein Nitzok La'ochlin. What about a stream of food that was like melted? Okay, we've been talking about melted fat, animal fat. So is that viscous enough for it to qualify? Do we say that because it's a rear is kind of a strand, right? A hanging strand. So the Tanakama, the first opinion, the honey and the batter, they kind of form strands that spring back. The honey lays behuri, right? But fat doesn't do that. Okay, it may be thicker, but it doesn't spring back. Maybe the reason is because just because they're thick, there's no springing back as I described, but just as because of the thickness of the mixture transmits tuma, even though it hasn't actually been in the tame vessel. Okay, that's kind of a good question. In other words, what is the real reason for the tuma to go into the tahar vessel? Is it because, as I originally described, that there's a retraction, like a springing back, or is it because the thickness of the mixture is more like a solid, and so it becomes like one piece? It's not no longer like the liquid; it's like one piece that's partly in the tame vessel and partly in the tahar vessel, so everything becomes tame. Oh, Rava, Tashma, Rava, pursuing proof. If you have a whole piece of fat from a dead body, v'iticha, and you melted it, tame, it's still tame. Hayam forward v'iticha. What if they were a bunch of small pieces, each one less than a kazayas, and then you melt them together? Tahor. Then it's tahor. In other words, the pieces don't mix, right? Each piece was less than the kazayas, right? The fact that you melt them and mix them together doesn't combine them from the tuma sense. Now, if you want to say that the stream is not a connector for these foods, then um, then then I would say that if you have a scant kazayas of meat of chaylev from a dead body and you melt it and then you consume it or you touch it, right? But some of it must have separated because when you heat it, in the pan, then it doesn't all stay together, right? So you don't any longer have a full kazayas that you're in contact with. Rav Zera says, not necessarily. No, Mar Braid Ravina Targumina. We can, I and Mar Braid Ravina explain it like this. What are we talking about with the melted fat? You go into Bahade de Mir Tafle while you're heating it. Solik Amuda de Nura Lakume de Mana. So imagine not a frying pan, but more like a pot, a small pot. So a column of fat gets kind of superheated or goes up to the top of the pot, the karash, and it cools there and congeals there. The isi kula gabe hadade. So it's all together at all times. So in other words, it's some kind of some kind of instant heat kind of thing. Like you put something on a very hot flame, and the whole piece of chaylev kind of instantly melts and shoots up and congeals, so it's all still together. In other words, it's not like what I had imagined before, a skillet where you melt something and it separates as it melts. No, this all melted exactly instantaneously and then congealed instantaneously, so it's all still there together in one piece. It's still condensed. Okay. I'm going to Ravina Ravashi, so Ravina tried to say as follows. Kashma, here's another proof. Beishamai Omrim, Beishamai in the mission that we just saw, they included Afamikva Shel Grisin Shelpul, a porridge, with nation sold in Lachraim because they spring back. So doesn't that prove that that is the determining factor, right? And not whether or not it's a solid, but because it springs back. So Gemara says, "Mida area." Is that what you think? Chasam mishum desmichin. The Tanakama might consider the stream a connection in the case of the honey because of how thick it is. Chacham mishum riri. But in the case of the porridge, Beis Shammai says nothing to do with the thickness. It's because of the strands that spring back. Okay, so in other words, they might not be using the same criteria. Okay, next, moving on in the Mishnah. The Almalo Tarvad Rekev. One of the things that makes a Nazir Tameh is a ladle full of dust from a dead body. The Kamashiro. So what is this ladle full? This is an unusual measure. We often have zayis, we have a kav, we have all kinds of other measures, but we don't often see Malo Tarva, the ladle full. How big is the ladle? Piski Amar Malo Pisas Yad. Piski says it's a handful. Yochanan Amar Malo Chachna. So two, I think Pisas Yad is a palmful, and Rabbi Yochanan says a handful, which is a larger measure. So let's try to examine which is correct. Tanan, we have a brisa. Malo Tarvad Rekav She'amru. What is this? This brisa says, what is the ladleful? Yeshnon me'ikar etzvos l'mala. From the base of the fingers up to the fingertips. In other words, that's how much So this is reminiscent. I'm not sure if this is exactly the same measure, but if you remember in the temple, when the Kohen takes a handful of ketoros or of a mincha, which is it? Maybe it's the ketoros. You kind of take a what you can grab in your fingers like this. Okay, so it's not really in your palm, but it's between your fingers when you make a fist. Um,
I can't do it.
so you okay, well, good thing you're not a Kohen. Um, so this seems pretty clear, right? The measure is like a call it fingerful. The verb mayor, that's what the mayor says. The rabbis say a handful. Okay, so so Rabbi Yochanan, who said Melo Chafna, a handful, accords with the rabbis. El Chizkiah command, but Chizkiah, who says Melo Pisa Sayad, that doesn't necessarily seem to be the same as Reb Meir in this other brisa, who says May Ikar Etzbos Ulala, from the base of the fingers and upward. Okay, Loka Reb Meir, Loka Rabbanan. It's not like either of those. I'm right. The same. Melo Pisa Sayad, Umelo Kishrei Etzbos Ulamala. No, it's the same thing. They're just using different terms, but they mean the same thing. When Chizkiah says Melo Pisa Sayad, he means the same thing as Rameir, who says from the what did he say exactly? May Ikar expose Mala. Same measure. Arle Rishimi Rav Papa. Rishimi said to Rav Papa, Mimai Dahai Mikishrei expose Mala Larosh. Dilma Lamata Midday. Maybe, how do you know that when it says from the knuckles, right? From the Kishrei explosive is the knuckles. It means from the knuckles up. Maybe it means from the knuckles down. The Havale Malo Pisa Sayad. Okay, so here are my knuckles, right? Does it mean when they say from the knuckles on? Does it mean this way towards the fingers? Does it mean this way? It means the palm full. Okay. Teku. So there's no answer to that. It's an impossible, a question that cannot be answered. Okay, let's go on a little further because we have a very short daf today, and a little bit longer tomorrow. Tell Rabbanan, the rabbi said, what kind of dead body does this rule about dust from a corpse apply? It has to be pure dead body. So it has to be a body that was buried without a shroud. The Aron Shoshayish in a marble coffin, a stone coffin. In other words, it's impregnable. Can't get any dust from outside. Or on a stone floor. That is a dead body to which this law of a ladle full of dust applies. But if you have a shroud, the orange lakes, or in a wooden coffin, which can decompose, or on a brick surface, which again can decompose, then the law doesn't apply. So it means not that the rekav isn't tameh, if it's from the dead body, but now you can't tell anymore. It's not identifiable if it's mixed with other material, right? So the decomposition of the body is mixed with the decomposition of the, let's say, the shroud or the coffin, and you can't tell anymore. Is it from the body? Is it not from the body? Is it a mixture? So then it wouldn't apply. So in other words, in a typical case of a dead body having decayed to this point of being dust, it doesn't really apply unless you're certain that it's all organic material from the body.
So this excludes basically everyone who's ever had a reasonable burial.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, that's what it's saying. It's like it's an extreme. It's only a theoretical case. It's not something that one would ever have to deal with in reality. So it's interesting, right? Because sometimes the Gemara does that to kind of eliminate a category. I mean, something that always comes to mind is who is Amalek, or who is, you know, an Amalek, or Ammoni or a Moabi or whatever. So the Gemara says that Sancherib came and mixed everybody up, right? Yeah, you don't really know where anybody really came from anymore. So that I always understood that as a way for the rabbis to kind of abrogate these categories altogether in a practical way. So sure, theoretically, you have to kill a person from Amalek, but practically, you have no idea anymore who's from Amalek and who is not. So it's a way that the rabbis mitigated or abrogated or subverted the original Torah law. So this is a similar thing without the moral overtones, but it's a similar thing. Like, look, there's dust everywhere, so let's get real. You know, we're not going to worry about whether this dust came from a corpse because there's dust everywhere. So let's not worry about it anymore. Okay, I guess we'll stop here for today. Picking up here, I'll be doing tomorrow as well because David is traveling.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning.
Thank you. I'm also reminded of the examples in the Talmud where descendants of Rishaim, including even descendants of Haman, became Jews and even Torah teachers. So it's interesting that they may have actually noticed that and felt they had to change.
Interesting. Yeah.
All right. I may or may not make it tomorrow because I'm away for work, but I'll try to.
Okay.
Thanks. Joshua Clark.